Welcome to today's policy seminar, which is part of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture's 2021 month of March. My name's Mark Titterington, and I'm guiding us through this program of solutions workshops, policy seminars like this one, and of course our annual flagship conference. Together with our partners, we're exploring how to renew the global food and agriculture system to make it more resilient and sustainable. Enjoy today's event.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar in the policy week of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. My name is Jürgen Tack. I'm Scientific Director of the European Landowners Organization and co-organizer of this webinar. This webinar will be recorded for later use. And let's now have a look at why we have this webinar. There is an absolute need for a new balanced and strengthened post-2020 EU forest strategy. And the EU forest strategy remains one of the main policy tools to integrate European forests and forestry into all other policy areas. Considering forests and the forest-based sector's potential for tackling the ongoing climate and health crisis, but we also have to ask ourselves the question how to ensure that it's becoming one of the highest priorities within the EU, while still recognizing the role of forest owners and managers to continue the transition to a greener and to a more sustainable economy. Today, we want to open the discussion with as well our speakers as with the audience, how to better engage the private sector, but also to ensure that its voice is taken into consideration within this new forest strategy, which is including topics such as old growth forest, strict protection, the use of exotic species, etc. The idea is to have, by the end of this webinar, a clear guidance on the impactful policy recommendations at the European level. And to do that, ladies and gentlemen, I have a great set of speakers with me. We have Monica Hernandez-Marchillo, Project Manager for InnoForest. We have Peter Meyer, Managing Director of the Austrian Research Center for Forests, and we have Mark Palahari, Director of the European Forest Institute. But the first one I would like to introduce to you is Janez Potočnik, for many of us known as former Commissioner for the Environment, as former Commissioner of Research, but today specifically in its role of the Chairman of the Forum for the Future of Agriculture 2021, and also as President of Think Forest. Janez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jürgen. Dear friends, thank you for the opportunity to address you. The topic is important and timely. We all know how much attention it is attracting in current debates in the European Commission, and not easy ones, as one can hear and imagine. No question at all, important developments were triggered by the European Green Deal, a new growth strategy, acknowledging that environmental and economic goals are not in contradiction, setting zero net emissions of GHG by 2050 and introducing the need for decoupling growth from resource use, while acknowledging also the need for fair and just transition. It was released before the COVID crisis, but it is now as relevant as before, if not more. It is a bold vision, a novelty in European policy space, setting a new direction important not only for Europe, but for the entire global community. The real challenges remain, like always, linked to uncertainty of implementation. How to address sufficiently drivers and pressures leading to challenges we have to solve. How to offer enough systemic perspective to guide decision-making. and how to address the extra risk due to the COVID recovery needs. One cannot discuss all that without taking into account the essential role of natural resource management, and forests, of course, belong among them. The way we treat natural resources, to a large extent, determines economic results, as well as environmental and health impacts. Natural resources are a bridge between economy and competitiveness on one hand, and the climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and health implications on the other. European Green Deal should not be understood as a communication adopted in December 2019, but rather as a set of documents and measures based on the general orientation set in the communication. So while the European Green Deal communication does not address the forest-related questions as forests would deserve, one should not be too much worried about that, if the appropriate steps will be taken in the near future. So let me quote the Green Deal communication on this point. I'm quoting, "This communication is an initial roadmap of the key policies and measures needed to achieve the European Green Deal. It will be updated as needs evolve and the policy responses are formulated. All European Union actions and policies will have to contribute to the European Green Deal objectives. To deliver the European Green Deal, there is a need to rethink policies for clean energy supply across the economy, industry, production and consumption, large-scale infrastructure, transport, food and agriculture, construction, taxation, and social benefits." End of quote. We have seen many important European Commission proposals adopted during the last year. Now it's time for forests and for the strategy addressing the question how we can manage them best. Forests offer great potential to address simultaneously many of the societal challenges European Green Deal talks about. So forests have a major role to play in our joint efforts to a more sustainable society and economy. This, of course, requires a convincing forest management-related proposal and convincing policies. Forest policy needs to be well coordinated with other policies, but should not be just a complement to other policies or a helpful instrument to achieve various political goals. It is high time that we stop looking to forestry only in the context to other policies, but to start looking to forests also through the forest-specific lenses. What is needed? It's a holistic, long-term vision, a strong, forests-related European Green Deal arm. While the debate of European Union competences linked to forests and forestry policy is again heated and overheated, one thing is clear. We urgently need this still missing part of the implementation of European Green Deal communication. We need it now, and it needs to provide convincing answers. Without taking our forests and forest-based solutions seriously, we will miss an important point in our sustainability-related efforts, including those related to the economic transformation that Europe needs and sustainable future requires. There are many important potential contributions and opportunities related to forests. We all know the importance of forests that they can play as carbon sinks. The role forests play in climate-related solutions should be increased. Achieving a circular economy, which is one of the central pillars of the European Green Deal, can also contribute to the goal and can be accelerated through the sustainable use of forest resources. There is an important opportunity for replacing some of the non-renewable based products with renewable, and it should be exploited. Of course, always tested through the life cycle effects on climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and health implications. Industrial sectors as construction, textiles, packaging, or chemicals will need to move towards low-carbon business models, and forest-based solutions could help reaching the climate neutrality. With emerging technologies, we can now sustainably transform wood into a new range of wood-based solutions that can replace and environmentally outperform fossil products and non-renewable materials such as plastics, concrete, or steel. Carefully, of course, closely monitored and respecting sustainability rules. Sustainable forestry and forest sector can play also an important role in realizing another ambition of the European Green Deal, a socially fair transition and a more equitable distribution of property. I'm convinced that the European Green Deal design transition will fly or fall, depending on how we will be able to address the social aspects. Forests are key because the way forests are distributed, owned, and managed, and the way forest resources are processed plays an important role. They offer a great opportunity to distribute jobs, infrastructure, well-being, and prosperity. Forest sector provides more jobs in Europe than the steel, cement, and chemicals industries together. Still, forest sector is only now getting in the center of attention, while those carbon-intense industries are called indispensable for already quite some time. The forest sector includes 400,000 SMEs and 16 million forest owners. Incredible socio-ecological infrastructure for the Green Deal, which should be smartly integrated in our transitional efforts. As you know, forest-based economy ultimately relies on healthy and resilient forest ecosystems. Therefore, investing in protecting forest ecosystems and biodiversity is a precondition for a sustainable and long-term, also economically sustainable forest sector. This also means that with the right policy framework and incentives, a well-functioning forest-based sector can become an important vehicle for ecosystem biodiversity-related investments. Public money is of course important and needed, but private investments are needed too. To conclude, as mentioned, the European Green Deal needs a strong forest arm to be able to deliver on its ambitions. Let me summarize some of the basic principles that I believe would need to be respected. Approach should be guided by sustainability respecting long-term based strategic interests designed by the European Green Deal. Restoring and protecting the forestry ecosystems to enhance biodiversity it hosts is essential. The role of forests as carbon sinks should be increased. When evaluating potential forest contributions to the effective adaptation and mitigation climate change policies, life cycle approach and analysis should be used. One should exploit the opportunities forests offer in circular bioeconomy approach by replacing some of the non-renewable resources with renewable wood potential. When potential economic use of forest resources is considered, it should be guided by the cascading logic. Good, sustainable forest management practice matters and should be our aim. Protecting public interests should be accompanied with public support, including public funding possibilities. Forests are our precious natural capital, and they deserve proper attention. They deserve a self-standing, forest-focused reflection and an integrated strategic approach. And hopefully soon. We all know that the Commission does not have an easy job, and that current debates about the forestry strategy, which adoption has already been postponed, are quite intense and heated. Commission does not need additional pressures and lobbying efforts, but rather understanding and sincere help, in particular by providing latest scientific knowledge and practical experiences following science-based policy advice. I'm sure this webinar could provide all of this. I wish us good debates and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Jannes, for those wise words. But we will have more wise wording later on during this webinar. I'm sure of that. Before I'm going to introduce you to our keynote speaker, I would like to inform you that you as an audience also have the possibility to interact with us. You can make use of the question and answers box, which you normally find on the right part of the screen you're looking to. And you can send us our questions. I'm not able to promise that all of your questions will be answered during this session, but I will certainly do my utmost best to make sure that most of them are getting an answer later on during this webinar. Our keynote speaker of today is someone with a long-standing history in forestry, with a master's degree in forestry and political science and a PhD in forest policy. He's at present the managing director of the Austrian Research Center for Forests, responsible for the development and implementation of the overall strategy and financial operations of BFW. But some of us know him in his former positions. He has been executive director of EUFRO, the International Union of Forest Research Organizations, and even before that, he was the head of the liaison unit of the Forest Europe. It's a pleasure to introduce you to Peter Meyer. Peter, the floor is yours.
Jürgen, many thanks for your kind introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this webinar. Ladies and gentlemen, what do you see in a forest? Nature, protection, health, sports, hunting, income, wooden products? For me, and maybe for many of you, it is more than one of these services, but can all the services be provided at the same time? Let us start with a global view. What is the value of the world's forests? The Boston Consulting Group made an attempt and estimated the total value of the world's forests as much as $150 trillion, nearly double the value of global stock markets. The analysis addresses different services of forests across 4 attributes: the climate service, environmental benefits, their commercial output, and their social value. Quantification, and I think we all agree, of these dimensions is difficult and can be debated. But this analysis provides us with the general idea that forests play a more important role for our society than we might think in our daily lives. At the same time, we face a growing world population. Currently, the Earth hosts about 7.7 billion people, and it will increase to about 11 billion people in the year 2100. A massive increase with a lot of questions on how we feed so many people and how our societies need to develop in general. For example, through a circular bioeconomy. Allow me to share a very interesting detail in the scenarios of population development. The population of Africa will increase from 17% to 40%. Together with Asia, which will have a share of 42% in the year 2100, more than 80% of the world's population will come from only these 2 continents. And Europe, our population will decrease in numbers and especially in shares, from now 10 to only 5% of the world's population in the year 2100. One can understand that political strategies and partnerships will need to take account of these developments to define the role of Europe and its resources in these drastic developments. In terms of forests, the implication is, of course, the development of land use and potential land use change. In the past, this, as one driver, has contributed to global deforestation. According to the Forest Resources Assessment of FAO in the year 2020, the forest area decreased from 32.5 to 30.8% in the last 3 decades. This represents a net loss of about 180 million hectares of forests, an area about the size of Libya. However, the average rate of net forest loss declined from roughly 8 to roughly 5 million hectares per year. In Europe, according to Forest Europe, the forest is still increasing. It currently amounts to about 227 million hectares in the Forest Europe countries. That's without the Russian Federation, and accounts for 35% of the total land area. In the EU, as we all know, forests cover roughly about 42% of the land area. All of this needs to be put into perspective with population increase and related effects. And let's be honest, it is our consumer behavior that plays a very important role for all future scenarios. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me a last global view. The Sustainable Development Goals. The Green Deal of the European Union highlights its role as the European contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals. As we know, these 17 global goals aim to describe a development for the future for us all and to balance economic, environmental, and social aspects. Forests play a very important role in many of these SDGs. For example, in goal number 3, it aims to offer solutions that reduce air, water, and soil pollution and contamination. The goals 8 and 9 aim to achieve higher levels of economic productivity through diversification, technological upgrade, and innovation. Goal 13, for example, aims to strengthen resilience and adaptive capacity for climate-related hazards and natural disasters. And finally, as an example, goal number 15 aims to ensure the conservation and sustainable and efficient use of terrestrial ecosystems and natural resources such as forests. These and much more goals for the development of a sustainable society are also reflected in the Green Deal. But the Green Deal also mentions that it is important to understand the trade-offs between economic, environmental, and social objectives. In terms of forests, this means the services currently discussed or already formulated in policies range from mitigating climate change to preserving and enhancing the biodiversity, to supporting the use and sustainable products policy, and also to provide an intact environment for our personal health, recreation, and social aspects. And as Janusz Potocznik, let me connect the last point, the social aspects, to another mega trend, urbanization. More than 70% of the world's population will live in cities in the year 2100. New demands on forests, especially near cities, will arise. During the current COVID-19 crisis, we already experience a significant increase for health and recreation services, especially near cities. So many services and interests exist when it comes to forests. Can we meet them all at the same time? It was tried at least since Rio de Janeiro, the Environment Conference in the year 1992. But target conflicts always prevented a binding global agreement on forests, in contrast, for example, to the climate or biodiversity conventions. Ladies and gentlemen, but what does all this imply for European forest strategy? The goals and existing policies in the EU related to forests differ and represent target conflicts in the many policies that touch on forests. However, these policies already represent an EU forest policy in a decentralized form. As mentioned before, some elements in these policies are similar when it comes to forests, others differ substantially and lead to target conflicts. We have two options how to deal with these conflicts. Continue along the institutional and topic-oriented silos of policies and try to maximize their respective interest in the usual policy-making process of interest, lobbying, etc., etc. But we also could try an alternative way ahead. This is, of course, an ideal scenario, but I believe we need to find new ways. We should create an open platform on forests to describe the common ground in different policies and also identify the disagreements very openly. The goal would be to develop a coordination mechanism on the many services of forests, understand different views and the reasoning behind it, and identify trade-offs, very often missing in debates. It would need trust in a new format for exchange and learning from each other. It will also require mutual respect and acceptance of different views. And research can play a very important role. I believe we all see the example of the COVID-19 pandemic and the crucial role research and the experts play in political decision-making. This platform role could be the essence of the European Forest Strategy. As a consequence of this approach, the European Forest Strategy would be accepted as the key definition and coordinating platform when it comes to forests and its services. What would it mean for practical implementation for the public and private forest owners in Europe? It would provide a guideline for management options. A partly new and additional portfolio of products might be developed, tailor-made to the services demanded. But as mentioned before, in the forest, not everything can be done at the same time. So choices have to be made by owners on the services and products they want to offer. Through this, public and private forest owners could be the entrepreneurs to shape an important component of the future of our societies through innovation. And some services that can be offered will be in the public interest and financed accordingly. Other products will be market innovations and paid by consumers. Ladies and gentlemen, is this easy to do? Allow me to close with a joke, with a lot of truth inside. Forestry is not rocket science. It is much more complicated than that. Therefore, I believe that we need a strong coordinating mechanism with all relevant actors and policies on board to build the best forest rocket we can. And this could be the EU Forest Strategy. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Peter, for this keynote. What we did, we have invited two experts in the forestry field to give some feedback to your speech. And I have to say, we didn't dare to ask someone from NASA, so we kept it within the forestry environment. And the first person we asked to give some feedback is Monica Hernandez Morchillo, and she is a forestry engineer holding a PhD on integrated landscape management. The reason we asked her today is because she's managing the InnoForest project at the University for Sustainable Development in Eberswalde, Berlin. She holds already for 15 years of professional experience at the intersection of social ecological systems, promoting successful governance innovations for sustainable resource management. And she has quite a lot of field experience in as well the Peruvian Amazon, Brazil, and Kenya, where she was facilitating participatory processes to discern partnership solutions to environmental conflicts. She has always been on the bridge between field work with global policy, working for the United Nations Environmental Programme in Cambridge, where she was assisting the Convention on Biological Diversity, providing them with scientific and technical support on biodiversity and ecosystem services assessments. Monica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jürgen, for your presentation. And yes, I will introduce you briefly to the InnoForest project, which is a European Innovation Action Project that has been funded by Horizon 2020. And it lasted from 2017 in December until now. It has just finished. The main aim was to spark a transformation of the European forest sector by stimulating innovation for the sustainable supply and financing of forest ecosystem services. The consortium of the project was composed by a broad variety of stakeholders, from forest owners, forest associations, NGOs, SMEs, research institutes and universities, and also different environmental and forestry agencies across Europe. To prosecute this aim, we selected 6 innovation regions across Europe, and I will not give detail of them all because you can find all the information in our webpage, but just to briefly we have an innovation regions in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, where we look at payment schemes in community-owned forests. We also work in Italy, in Trento, where we look at forest pasture management to provide regulation services mainly, but also biodiversity conservation and climate regulation services. And we were also working in a nice project in Sweden called Love the Forest, where we were researching a multi-stakeholder initiative to bring the forest knowledge closer to high school children. Here, this is the workflow of our methodology that we implemented in these 3 years of project, and it's divided in 3 main parts. So first, we map the biophysical and the institutional conditions of forest ecosystem services in Europe. We wanted to know how well it matched the demand and the supply. Then we also did an analysis of the stakeholders in each innovation regions, because we wanted to know which are the visions, which are the interests, and which are their concerns. And finally, we also did constructive innovation assessment, which is a method based on scenarios, so that we apply in each innovation regions, where we could see how the innovation development process was actually having and developing along the 3 years. No? And as an underpinning type of methodology, we were assessing the factors that were enabling and hindering the progress of those innovations, using role-play games and also a framework that was created by the project called SETFIS. So yes, to go to the outcomes about the matching and the, let's say, the geographical overlay of the first supply and demand, we saw that actually this match is uneven in different parts of Europe, and still the matching of the supply and demand of forest ecosystem services can be greatly improved. We also saw that forestry policies are normally reactive in the national policies strategies, so that there is room for being much more preventive, especially under the light of climate change, and approaching more secure provision of forest ecosystem services before the damage occurs. After 120 workshops and meetings, we also kind of got to know which are the activities that were very important for the innovation development process of every of these innovation regions. And it was that first was very important to bring together all the different stakeholders at the very beginning of the innovation development process. That also we structured the network and provided information and provide this platform for exchanging experiences among the different innovation regions. It was also important to do these scenarios in the innovation so that the stakeholders could see which are the most, let's say, feasible future for each of the innovations. And another activity that was key was maintaining a direct contact with the forest ecosystem services provision, so that we can adjust the forest management. As some main conclusions of InnoForest project is that forest ecosystem services innovations in the European forestry sector are scarce and scattered, in particular for regulating and cultural services. We also found that the main obstacle is the reliance of forestry on a classical market-oriented economy. That reinforces a timber production-oriented paradigm. Due to the lack of competitive options for generating income from other forest ecosystem services, forest innovators are directly going towards biomass production where the markets exist. And this is a loop that leads to a lack of financial resources to compensate for other forest ecosystem services provision, as well as a lack of institutions that provide backup or security to forest owners so that they can manage, so that they can engage in governance innovation for other forest ecosystem services. And this is a dilemma. So foresters in Europe are largely recognizing the need to manage forests according to their various functions and to encounter today's challenges and to work also towards future's resilient forests. And just to finish and to address all this dilemma that we found as conclusions from In the Forest, we provided some recommendations for the European New Forestry Strategy that to forest the provision of the full range of forest ecosystem services across Europe, we need to proactively acknowledge and foster the central role of forests in providing, regulating and cultural forest ecosystem services, the implementation of systematic assessment of pest provision to know the type and quality over time. We need also to identify the societal demands, so to adequate our forest management practices, to streamline forest policy with a common phase approach across policy sector and administrative level. And finally, to systematically support governance innovation for the provisions of not marketable forest ecosystem services. Last but not least, I would like to guide you to the webpage where you can find all the details and information, and to thank you to every one of the people participating in the project. We could not see each other to celebrate, but we hope that soon we can toast and to finalize the project together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Certainly a very interesting project, I have to say. But you were not the only respondent we have asked. We have asked a second respondent, and that is Mark Palahi. He's director of the European Forest Institute. He's also a leading expert on forest and global change, with what I would call a new vision of the transformational role forests can play in fighting climate change and developing a circular bioeconomy. He has been director of the European Forest Institute since 2015, driving its development as a pan-European science policy platform and working to connect knowledge to action at the interface of science, policy and business. Mark has a PhD in forestry and economics, and his work, which has been featured in Nature and other high-level scientific journals, focuses specifically on the development of a sustainable circular bioeconomy that prospers in harmony with nature. Mark also leads the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance established by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales under his Sustainable Markets Initiative. And Mark, I'm very curious on what you have to tell us, please.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Dear colleagues, it's a pleasure to be with all of you. And thank you, Peter, for showing up also, and Monica, because it's nice to see some faces. Otherwise, I become too boring to myself. So the previous speakers have made really fantastic contributions, so difficult to add anything new. You left me with the bones here, but sometimes the bones are tasty. So I will try to build on some things that have been mentioned before. And I would like to start by the EU Forest Strategy that Janes and Peter mentioned, because I think it's crucial that the EU Forest Strategy, as Janes mentioned, provides the forest lenses to the EU Green Deal, so that Europe can see the full picture, the full potential of our forests in contributing to a post-fossil economy. Still, in my opinion, the Green Deal, when you read the Green Deal, looks at our forests with the old paradigm lenses, with fossil economy lenses, seeing the forest as a compensation for a broken economic system. This is at least my perception. But as Janes mentioned, the Green Deal is just an initial roadmap, so we have time to influence. Having said that, it is crucial to have a new forest strategy, but this will not be enough. It's not enough. We need also to bring that strategy to action. And we have had already a beautiful forest strategy. But has it been the key reference when discussing forest questions in connection to climate, biodiversity, or sustainable finance? Probably not. So as Winston Churchill used to say, however beautiful the strategy, we occasionally need to look at the results. So basically, we need a good EU forest strategy, but we need also the means to bring that strategy to action. And that is especially crucial in a decade where Europe needs to put forward its post-fossil economy, in a decade where our forests will face an unprecedented situation. On one hand, forests will face unprecedented risks related to climate change and the impacts of natural disturbances. We have seen already during the last years the extent of those impacts. On the other hand, the European forest-based sector will face unprecedented opportunities related to its potential to generate new bio-based solutions to replace fossil products and materials, especially in sectors that will need to become carbon neutral and circular in the next 2-3 decades. Janes mentioned already that. So I think to me, the great challenge of the new forest strategy, the guiding goal, is to provide guidance on how to unlock those opportunities and to use that traction to finance and put forward the needed action to adapt our forests to climate change and the increasing impact of natural disturbances. So in the next decade, forestry, forest management needs to become the vehicle to translate all those emerging opportunities in order to address the emerging risks that we will be facing. Remember that in Europe, in the last 5-6 decades, we have managed to simultaneously increase the forest sink, the wood harvested, and the extent of forest protected areas. I think this is a remarkable success that no other continent has achieved. And I try to summarize this in one figure. The EU forests are hosting 4% of the global forest, but they are responsible for 40% of the forest products global export value. All that by achieving as well that the EU forests have a climate change mitigation effect equivalent to 13% of the carbon emissions in Europe. I think this is not a bad figure to remember. Still, I believe that in the future, in the next years, we need to put our emphasis in increasing the value of our forest and from our forest at many different levels, starting from the ecological value of our forests, fostering forest biodiversity to ensure that our forests are ecologically resilient to climate change and can react to the increasing natural disturbances. Increase the economic value from our forests. This means new bioeconomy products that have higher economic and environmental value. This means doing more with less. It means also massive investments in innovation. And finally, we need to also increase the social value of our forests. Peter mentioned that. And especially I would like to connect here to the employment needs of the future. The Green Deal will not succeed, Janes mentioned this already, if we don't put forward a socially fair transition as well. And remember that many jobs will be lost in the future due to structural changes. We will need to close coal mines in many parts of Europe, and we will need to provide new jobs. And the forest sector is an amazing opportunity. It already provides more jobs, the forest sector, than the energy-intensive industries of steel, cement, and chemicals all together. So this already shows you the potential. Of course, doing all that requires a visionary strategy, but also needs to result, in my opinion, in a new deal for European forest. A deal that is articulated around 3 mutually reinforcing plans. An adaptation plan for European forests, this should be the foundation. An innovation plan for forest bioeconomy, and an employment plan that creates the human capital required to unlock the potential of the forest sector and the human capital that we will need to manage sustainably our forest landscapes of the future. So to summarize, without a new deal for European forests, there will not be a Green Deal for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rock, for this very engaging respondent to what we have said before. In the meantime, Janez Potočnik has joined us because we have some time now for questions. I would like to tell the audience, if you're interested to ask questions to our panelists, please make use of the question and answer section. I'm not able to promise you that all of your questions will be answered today. I will certainly do my utmost best to have as many of them being answered. The first question I have is a question for Peter. Forest and forestry have a huge potential to contribute to climate mitigation, not only by sequestering and storing carbon, but also due to the substitution potential using biomass to replace fossil-based products and energy. Now, which policies should be considered to boost the forestry sector contributing to tackle climate change?
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Yes, of course, a tricky question and leading, of course, to a very general picture on how policies related to forests are shaped. When you look into these demands that forests face in climate change, it's clear that the climate policies that globally, but also on the European level, are formulated are very central, and the role forests play in implementing many of the tasks and reaching the goals. But I think one has to warn that sometimes I have a feeling that planting trees is the solution to everything. And I think we need to be a little bit cautious. Our predictions show that forests in the next 30 to 100 years, at least in some parts, will not be a thing forever. It might be because of the change of forests themselves in adapting to climate change, that they will change themselves and lose this ability to be a thing forever. So they might become a source as well. So what we really need to understand in climate policy is that the ultimate goal is to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. So everything that we do needs to follow this goal. Therefore, we should not put all the responsibility on just growing trees and somehow magically absorbing all the carbon, but also be realistic and in the effects of what's happening in the next 10 to 100 years. And that is also what I meant with discussing trade-offs and different aspects. Sometimes sectoral policies tend to look inwards more than to look to other policies and to other goals that are mentioned in other policies. So it's very important to combine all these policies, like here climate, energy, biodiversity, and of course forests, to understand this role of forests in the climate debate. And let me end with one aspect. In the climate policy, we very often talk about CO2 and carbon storage in trees and in wooden products. But we so far do not include the substitution effect. That is a change to a new form of societal development. The circular bioeconomy, Mark very elegantly mentioned many of these aspects. So in an open debate, we also need to understand the various effects that we have, and substitution of coal, oil, gas, non-renewable resources is a very important effect when we want to fulfill our goal to reduce CO2 in the atmosphere. And sometimes I have an impression we tend to forget what is our ultimate goal and how should we shape our policies around it. So I think there's a bright future and a very important future, as I think all the three of us have portrayed, Janis, Mark, no, the four of us, Monica and myself. But we need to understand all the effects and all the other goals that are around us and how to combine that to really reach this bright future together.
Is someone else willing to interact with Peter as he was referring to some of our panelists? Or can you largely agree to what was said?
I'm afraid that I don't see the question. Can you repeat it?
No, well, Peter, let's say the question was not specifically to you. The question was, okay, on what you just answered, but when one of the others would like to react, just want, because you were referring to them at the end of your story. But I have another question coming in. And as this question is related to, let's say, policy and the development by the European Commission, who could be better placed than Janis to give me an answer on this one? It's the following one. The proposed biodiversity strategy to 2030 includes having a 30% protected area and a 10% strictly protected areas in Europe by 2030. Percentages referring to the total land area in Europe. However, up to now, there is still little detail in the way people have been thinking about this process behind those numbers, and certainly how do we have to reach them. Which advice would you give policymakers, colleagues, policymakers, to increase conservation and preserve primary forests in Europe? Janez.
Thanks, Jürgen. Since some are questioning the targets, I would start with the first very clear message. Targets are effective policy tools and it should be used. That was proven in the past, and I think it's good. I do, of course, know that protected and strictly protected areas are not entirely overlapping with Natura 2000, but Natura 2000 is an extremely important part of that. And since I was responsible for that for quite some years, my reply and my optic to that questions will be a bit through that. As you probably know, in Europe, 18% approximately of land area, it's under Natura 2000. And if you would also add something which is protected on the basis of national protection, if I remember well from the biodiversity strategy, this comes to something like 25% of the land. Important part is also marine, but this 25% would mean that what is lacking is actually around 5% still on comparing to the targets which were set. But let me go to my own country, to Slovenia. So in Slovenia, Natura 2000, it's 37% of country territory. So almost 6% of inhabitants in Slovenia, that's around 130,000 people are living in that site. And 70% of Natura 2000, it's actually forest. So forests are extremely important part of the protection system. So my first message and conclusion after the targets would be, targets are possible. So we can achieve them. And I know also that many who are first time coming to my country are impressed by the beauty of nature, and that many are saying that they would like to return because of that fact. So yes, there are some who see it also as problematic, but sorry, this will always be the case. So in the biodiversity strategy, knowing how the European Commission works, I would dare to say that the targets which were set are relatively well impact assessed and based on relevant science. So in short, I think they are needed. And when it comes to the questions which you asked, Jürgen, what would be the how to reach them? I think that biodiversity strategy, in a way, it's already giving the answer itself, because it's providing also so-called the European Union Nature Restoration Plan. So it's in 10 points: strengthening EU legal framework for nature restoration, bringing nature back to agricultural land, addressing land take and restoring soil ecosystems, increasing the quantity of forests and improving their health and resilience, win-win solutions for energy generation, restoring the good environment status of marine ecosystems, restoring freshwater ecosystems, greening urban and peri-urban areas, reducing pollution, and finally addressing invasive alien species. Some of that was known already from the past. And as it was rightly said, it's not enough to write the strategy. Most important is how you actually deal with the implementation. But let me finish with just putting some of the guiding principles, which I think would be fundamental in the implementation and follow-up. I think that the determination of protected areas definitely should be based on science-based guidelines, which was more or less the base already in the past. And as much as possible, this should be done without any political interest interface, because we know exactly what political interests in the context of nature preservation are. Protecting nature should be considered as public interest and also as a public investment for sustainable present and for sustainable future. The way we see the world now evolving, it's not difficult to conclude that well-kept nature will be an essential well-being and economic treasure. So determining our quality of well-being in the future. So a kind of precondition for good life of the nation, if you want. Then the thing which I would also mention is that it's extremely important that you keep an eye for coexistence between the nature and people who are living there. Because if you don't do that, you will have the problem. So protecting nature will not be optimal and will be limited if we don't reach for that kind of angle also. And the last two comments, in that context, I think that tasking private owners to protect public interest should be accompanied with public support, including public funding. And I was always fighting also on EU level that they would understand that you cannot just task with public interest somebody without really not thinking about how you provide any kind of public support. And last message, basically to policymakers. Do not be angry if you are blessed with a beautiful intact nature, but be rather thankful. Maybe some short-time infrastructure or economic investment will indeed be more complicated, but nothing is wrong with that. We are not here to take decisions which will be the easiest and most profitable in the short run and which would be only benefiting us, but to act responsibly and protect the nature while improving our well-being. So we need to provide fair conditions to thrive also to all following us. Unfortunately, some depths of depleted nature should already be repaid due to non-responsible behavior, which Peter has mentioned, and we can talk about that also if you wish, so on the production and on the consumption side, which is the real problem and the real thing which we should address at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you for this extensive but very clear answer, giving us a clear objective for the future of our forests. My next question is partly related, Jannes, to something which you just mentioned, the interaction between nature on one side and the fact that people are living within our surrounding nature. But I'm not going to give that question to you. I will give that question to Monica. And it's about, well, some people have that idea that forestry should be defined as an extractive activity and thus automatically not compatible with a high level of protection. So in a certain way, ignoring the diversity of European forests due to its geographical differences and human influence already for a very, very long time. I would like to know, Monica, in your view, how important is management of forests for their conservation? And I will have to ask you to switch on your microphone, because otherwise we are not going to hear the answer.
No.
Okay, no. Thank you.
Well, I would say this is kind of a tricky question in the sense that I could do a small reflection here before. And I think that it is very important that we start changing our mindset from this simplistic view of forest management as an exploitation activity, which is not valid anymore. And this misunderstanding of what is forest management can be also due to the fact that foresters need to start explaining more clearly what we do, so that society and especially children will start having an understanding that cutting trees could be for timber production, but at the same time, when following ecological and sustainability principles, could also contribute to the vitality of the forest. So that is first. And so based on that, forest management encompasses a broad variety of activities. It refers to all, so biological, social, legal, technical, and economic measures that are affecting the forest. And forest management objectives then can be for conservation, can also be for the utilization of one or more ecosystem services, but can also be a mixture of both, as Peter was pointing at the beginning of his presentation. No? Depending on the objectives, then the foresters will use different techniques. And in the case of conservation, for example, forest vitality and resilience can be improved by choosing certain silvicultural practices that make the best use of already existing natural structures and functions. We can also support nature through forest management in diversifying trees species compositions when needed, or in introducing more diversity structurally speaking, horizontally or vertically. So forest management, just to keeping it short, is crucial for forest conservation, and it's a matter of having an informed decision on which are the best practices and how we implement them in the field.
Okay, that's very clear. The question which came in is related to climate change, and I think I would like to give this one to Mark. Mark, the question I got in was, climate change is having major impacts on our societies and ecosystems, including, of course, the forest ecosystems. And we have seen storms, droughts, floods, pests, diseases, and yeah, of course, famous pictures we see in the news, mega fires. What prevention and preparedness measures should be prioritized?
Thank you, Jürgen. Let me start with a preamble. First of all, climate change is going to change the way we do forest management, but it's going to change also the way we protect biodiversity. I think we need to start getting rid of the static protected areas approach. That might be needed in certain locations, I am not saying that, but the major challenge is going to be in fostering biodiversity in the natural, semi-natural, commercial forest. I think there we need to play the cards. And we will not succeed in protecting biodiversity in Europe without engaging and providing the right incentives to forest owners and to the forest managers. I think Europe, Brussels need to get this to the point. There is no Green Deal without engaging those that are managing our most important green infrastructure in Europe. Having said that, I think we have reached a tipping point regarding climate change impacts to European forests. And the last 3-4 years are very clear. I mean, several hundreds of thousands of hectares devastated in Central Europe by bark beetles, increasing number of forest fires in places where forest fires were not so frequent or not so intense in the past. So it is clear that we are reaching a tipping point. And we are not going to solve this problem unless we put forward a European level massive adaptation plan for European forests. And I would like here to emphasize something that Peter mentioned, and I think is very true. First of all, let's not be obsessed with making targets on increasing forest sinks. Look what happened in Canada. For the last 20 years, Canada's managed forests, more than 200 million hectares, have been not a carbon sink, but a carbon source due to forest fires and the impacts of bark beetles. So forest sinks will come as a consequence if we do right our homework. And our homework is to make our forests resilient to climate change. And this requires active management, more than strictly protected areas, which are needed in specific cases. But let's start understanding the massive problem that is coming to us if we don't act. So we urgently need an adaptation plan for European forests. And here again, something that Peter mentioned, I know that politicians are very keen on planting trees, basically because this is very easy. You get a very nice photo, our highly urbanized societies understand very well the message, but let's be honest, planting trees is not going to solve the problems. In Europe, what we need to do is to act in the existing forest to ensure their resilience. Planting trees can be part of the solution because we will need to bring new species, new genetic material to many places in Europe. But I think it's important, as Peter also mentioned, for politicians to understand that forestry is not an easy thing. It's more complicated than rocket science, as Peter mentioned. And here we will not solve the problems with silver bullets and nice photos planting trees. So please, let's start being serious about the European forest. This is a complex issue, and it has many environmental, economic, and social implications. So I really hope that politicians get serious about the European forest. So basically, my point here is an adaptation plan for European forest. Without that, forget forest sinks, forget the forest bioeconomy, forget forest biodiversity. And an adaptation plan requires incentives, investments, and especially the engagement of forest owners and forest managers. So that's my point.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I have another question, Mark, which I also would like to direct to you. Sorry that there are two questions immediately after each other. But I got a question on how can the European Union support member states in finding common forest biodiversity indicators. And the person asking this says, okay, this is really something we need to have because we need it to estimate the value of our forests, which in turn is needed to develop policies like the payment for ecosystem services and measurable policy objectives that aim to maximize synergies between forest ecosystem services. I know that developing biodiversity indicators is never an easy task. How do you think the European Union can support member states in finding such common biodiversity indicators for forests?
Thank you, Jürgen. I think, to be honest, this is more a question for Janez. It's a more political question. I am just a humble forest scientist. To be honest,
let
me answer first. But
excellent. No, but let's do the following thing. If you're answering it from a more scientific point of view, I will ask Janez to ask from a more policy side.
Look, I will be now not politically correct, but I think it's good to put a bit of spice into the debate. You ask how the European Commission can support member states. I think the member states have the right capacities to do this, to be honest. So what we need here is to overcome the childish polarization that has been created in the last years between different ministries at national level, between Commission services within the European structures. And again, coming back to my last point, I think we need to take European forests much more serious than it has been taken. And this requires overcoming the childish polarization that has been created by different interest groups. And you see the same people fighting over very simplistic views on forests. I think we have the science. If the Commission and the member states would like to move forward, we have the science basis to put forward very solid biodiversity indicators all over Europe. What we need to come back is to join forces and do it together. And I think the member states, through the national institutes like Peter's one, and the European Forest Institute has been working for many years on a project called Integrate, which exactly aims at integrating forest biodiversity conservation into forest management. So we have a lot of experience, scientific data, the scientists that can put forward it, but we need the political will to do it, basically. The science is there. We need the political will. So the key question is for Janez, who understands how politicians think.
Okay, so I've heard childish polarization. The key is in the hands of policymakers. Janez, you have to answer this.
No, not at all, because I'm not a politician. But anyway, I can help with some argumentation. You know, at the end, it's really any of those decisions is political decision, because the rules of the game and regulation, it's actually proposed by the politicians. But since I'm chairing currently International Resource Panel, UN-based, which is called Science Policy Interface, for a question like that, which you asked, what are the biodiversity indicators? I would, of course, ask scientists. I would not ask politicians, because you will not get the answer from politicians. From politicians, you will get just the reply, or better, are they acting in a reasonable and responsible way, and how they are basically bringing that into political reality and in our daily lives. So where I would just like to add to something which, Mark, you were talking before, because you were actually asking for a very strong adaptation plan for the forests. So, you know, we will need much more adaptation plans, which will be stronger and stronger and deeper and more costly if we will not do in the first place prevention. So that's the problem. The problem is that if the only long-lasting solutions are solutions which remove the drivers and pressures leading to problems. And in that context, that goes to agriculture or forestry, but mainly to all economic activities. So nowadays, people are starting to talk that we need to address climate and biodiversity issues together. Come on, wake up. Of course we have to address them together because the drivers behind are pretty much the same. It's the way how we have organized our societies, the way how we behave, the way how we have designed our economic systems. Only that in the case, I don't know, of the climate change, maybe the energy questions are more important than how you handle the other sectors, and sometimes even considered as too important because other sectors are also very important. While in the biodiversity, it's different. It's more related to the agriculture, it's more related to forestry and so on. So, but in essence, drivers and pressures will never be removed, and we will have more and more adaptation problems if we will not really settle the way how we have organized our economies. And if we, so we constantly ask ourselves the questions of cleaning the things. It's not the question of the cleaning the things. It's the question of how basically so our economy, if I'm blunt, it's organized very much on that, on how that we measure GDP and the amount of product outputs. And on the basis of that, we judge the success of the society. It is connected with well-being, but it is not well-being, sorry. If you would look through the human needs, because many of those things which I have mentioned before are simply not used efficiently, in particular resources are not used efficiently. If you would look it from the human needs, and in the first place, you ask yourself a question, how much of that natural resources is actually needed? You would come to totally different results, sorry. So if you are maximizing the amount of the cars which you are producing, I would ask you in the first place, how many of those cars could be better utilized? How much can we avoid of the use of natural resources for producing them? And that has nothing to do with less well-being and less mobility of yourself. No, just done in a different way. But until we don't ask those difficult questions, we will have the problems with all horizontal and all strategies which we are discussing, because they are essential.
Jürgen, can I say 10 seconds only?
Yeah, please do so.
Janet, because you just confirmed what I said, because the drivers of the problem are outside the forest sector. So let's be clear, let's address the real problems, is the fossil economy. And let's not put the burden onto forests, putting all the expectations of carbon neutrality, having these big expectations of carbon sink. Our forests need an adaptation plan to adapt to the change, because even if we remove the drivers, climate change is already there and our forests are not adapted. So let's attack the real problem, which is the fossil economy. And when we discuss the forest-related issues, we try to mix the picture and use forests as a compensation or as a complementary to address the problem. You know, so I think you are right. Let's address the real drivers.
I would say absolutely yes. What you are saying, only I would go a bit broader. It's not just the fossil economy. It's how we, for example, use the biomass. Because sometimes if you don't approach in a cascading way, you do the damage. Also with the non-fossil things. So looking to that picture a bit more systematically and a bit more coherently, I think it's the only way to do it.
Now that Mark and Yannis are almost agreeing, I think also Peter would like to say something.
Thanks very much, Jürgen. No, the last point both of you were making, that is also something that I believe is very important. I mentioned it's the consumer behavior. Ultimately, this is a very, very important driver on how we set our priorities with a planet that will have more and more people, and so there needs to be very serious thinking and changes, and that involves also how we use our resources and how we use forests. So I think this is very clear that the forest sector as such, to look at that isolated is not enough. There's a lot more to it than just that. And that brings me to the second point. I was more polite than Mark. I was not saying childish disagreements. I was saying, well, there is interest, debate in silos. But it's the same thing, of course. And that is a very, very difficult
You're a political scientist, Peter. You're a political scientist. I am just a humble forester.
But that of course is a very complicated issue to bring different institutional interests, different personal convictions, and that you might have together, and to listen to each other and try to find what is the common ground. I think it can be done, but it's not an easy task, because it's easy that we agree, but if we had a more a set of representations of interests of the whole society here at the table, we would have a different debate maybe. So I'm just saying that is the trick. And let me come to the forest strategy. If it is able to bring these interests together, then I think we win, because in all the aspects, Mike, you mentioned, and Yanis, you mentioned. Because let's think about how the forest strategies have been implemented in the past 10 to 20 years. Have they been very effective? I think we have to be honest, they have not been very effective in influencing also policy making. So I think a chance for that is to provide this platform, or to provide this setting exactly as we have discussed, to say, well, this is the problem. These are the interdependencies, these are the effects. We need to bring that together at one place, otherwise we will all lose. And so I think that's why it's important to understand that there's a bigger concept behind. It's demanding, and of course, conflicts cannot be avoided, but it's one way of solving these problems and putting forests in the center of a very big debate. Yeah? That's why I also brought the Sustainable Development Goals in. Ultimately, that is what the EU also needs to implement, and the SDGs is a whole array of goals, as we know, and if you look at the goals, of course, they're also conflicting when you implement all of them. So that is why it's important, again, to look outside the box and to see the bigger picture from the forest owner to the SDGs. It's a long stretch, we all know, but it can be done, and I think we can help to make that work. A last point to the indicators. I mean, Mike, I think you also mentioned it. I mean, there's a lot of indicators around. Forest Europe has defined biodiversity indicators for many, many years. And the payment for ecosystem services, that is a very political decision. I think there's only one country in the world that has put a price, and that's Costa Rica, because tourism became so important when they reforested their country. So it's a political decision how much value to be put to certain services. So I end here. It's a long debate, and I want all others also give a chance to reply. Thank you, Jürgen.
Thank you, Peter. A slightly different question, which was coming in specifically on the Mediterranean region, but I think we can broaden that a little bit up to the rest of Europe. We see in a lot of places rural depopulation. So the question was if forest ecosystem services and forest innovations, if they could benefit to counteract rural depopulation. And I think, Monica, with your experience also outside of the European Union, that you're the best to answer this one, maybe.
Thank you, Jürgen. Well, I'm also coming from a Mediterranean country, from Spain, so I really know very well, and also from a small village, so knowing very well what's happening with this rural depopulation. And let's say that this is not as simple as putting some forest innovation in place and wait that the population will fix there forever. So first is knowing that this population is existing because of deep systemic problems that are of very different nature depending on the country and depending on the place, and the people are migrating normally to the bigger cities, yes, for having jobs, but also because in their villages they are not having the services that they need day to day. They are not having access to health, to small hospitals, to education. So it's a two ways here. So by fixing population in villages again, so the new rurals that now are so fashionable, we might need, well, innovations in forestry can have a small, at the moment, a small plus and like sparking an attractive opportunity, but they are not in place, and they need a lot of policy support, which is not there. And as I said, there are much more important issues and topics to cover before we are starting, let's say, convincing people or to go back to the rural places. Another important issue is now with Corona, as I think Peter mentioned, many people are going back to forests, and especially forests close to cities. And if we extrapolate this effect to villages, we can see how many people are started going and looking again to their villages and with nostalgic views. But I don't think nostalgia will bring us further. So the population is really having deep problems. European Union is trying to tackle it since quite long with the rural development policies in the CAP. But still, this implementation needs to be sustained. And every country has to do the commitment to continue providing services within those villages, as I said before.
Okay, thank you. Well, with only 10 minutes left within this webinar, I have to condense my questions a little bit, but a question, well, let's say it's coming back in a number of forms, but basically it's systematically coming to the fact that, okay, the European Forestry Strategy today implies a top-down approach and of the EU policy development, and whether that doesn't have to change to a bottom-up approach. And I think I first will ask Peter to answer, but I would say, Janez, don't disappear, but because I think you two would be a great person to answer this one. But I first go to Peter.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. Thanks for the question. In my argumentation, I was hinting at a horizontal approach, so another approach. So it's about different policies trying to find common ground to see whether you agree and so on. But that, of course, can be done at the EU Commission's level. It can be done and should be done also at the national level. And Mark also hinted at that the national scale, of course, is very often the root cause of some of the issues we see higher up in European and international agreements. So it's very important to see the bigger picture. The forest sector always has been a very important sector that needed to take account of what's happening at the national level, because forests, of course, are diverse, and one size that does not always fit all in many aspects. So the national or even subnational wisdom is very important. But for me, it's not either or. I think both is needed. There is a bottom-up, but also a certain hierarchical approach for combining this platform, as I have called it, or this rocket, with the other policies also at an European and international level.
I forgot to put on my microphone this time. Janez, you would like to interact?
Yeah, but practically I have nothing to add to how Peter has explained it, because I think it's correct. We know how the treaties are dealing with that question, but we also know that more could be done with the cooperation on EU level if we just pick up the right things. There are two things which I would just like to mention. I think that the attention of the European Commission in the future will very much need to deal with two important questions which are related with forests. One is the biomass, how to manage the biomass, because here we don't have a holistic view on that question. And the second is land management. Because if you look to the Commission's documents, and I have done a nice slide a year ago, less than a year ago, which was basically saying if you analyze various kinds of Commission documents, you would find out that for the protection, we need additional land, protection of nature, that for agriculture, we need additional land, that for transport needs, we need additional land, that for energy needs, we need additional land. But that's not the land which is, so it looks pretty logical when you look at it from the individual approach, but this is simply not existing. And we know that urban sprawl, in Europe, it's approximately 2% per year. So where that land is existing? If I remind you on the Mark Twain, who was saying many time ago, by land, they are not making it anymore. So that's exactly why I think it's very important that this is approached in that way. And just very short comment on the consumer behavior, Peter, which I also believe that it's an important part of the story. But consumer needs two things. One is to be well informed. So I think that we have, so well informed means product passports and other things which are connected with that, on which I know that European Commission now very actively works. But the other thing which consumer needs is also the right signals from the market. You know, if you get the signal from the market that if you want to eat more healthy and more environmentally friendly food, you will sadly have to pay double price. If you want to drive an environmentally friendly car, you will pay 30% more. If you want to have a house which is built in line with the environmental standards, you will pay 20-30% more. So you know that's not how we lead the consumer behavior. And again, we come to the same problem, which is that unfortunately natural capital is not part of any cost of any producer. And if this is the case, then stop crying, because this will continue until we solve that problem. I think it's like cascading story. Then all the dominoes are falling, tap, 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 and at the end we have a mess.
Okay, that's clear. And let's hope we are not going to have that mess. One remaining question. You are speaking about our forests to contribute to solve the climate problem. But also our forests are suffering because of climatic change. And some of the questions coming in were referring to, okay, will we be able to have in the near and further future the same forests as we have today, or do we have to think about including exotic non-invasive species into our present forests to make sure that they are surviving the next 100 years? Now, I would like to give the floor to Mark as the first one to answer this.
Well, this is clear that we will not have the same forests. I think this has been clear already for 20 years since I have been involved in scientific research. 20 years ago, we were conducting research already on forest fires, where we already make predictions that it will be spreading the problem to Central Europe, and there will be an increasing Mediterraneization of many Central European countries. So we will have new species, we will need to have new genetic material adapted to the new circumstances. So define what is exotic, and then we will see. But is exotic to have a Mediterranean species coming to France? Is what the trend will naturally evolve. The problem is that sometimes we will need to help. We will need to put forward assisted migration actions to really help our forests to adapt faster, because climate change is happening faster than some species can be moving to higher altitudes or latitudes. So that is a challenge that we are facing, that we need to speed up the process. And this is why we need the active management, but clearly we will not have the same forests. And again, let me emphasize once more, if we want our forest and the forest sector to play an important role in mitigating climate change, first we need to ensure the adaptation. Without adaptation, you can make big plans for mitigation, it will not be there. Look at Canada, look at many states in the US. There are several states, Montana included, where for the last 10 years, the forest of those states have not been a carbon sink, but a carbon source. It's as simple as that. And one thing that Janes always emphasized, I think it's time to think systemically. We cannot continue thinking linearly. We will not solve the problems we have ahead of us with linear thinking. So we really need to have this paradigm shift. As an Albert Einstein, you use this many times, Janes, this quote of Albert Einstein: we will not solve our problems with the same thinking we had when we created them. This is exactly what we need now, a new way of thinking as basis for a new economic paradigm. So linear thinking will not move us forward. This is, and one more emphasis on what Janes mentioned. One of the biggest problems that if we don't solve, we will not solve all the others, is the way we measure the health of our economy. We need to move beyond GDP. Even to address the issue of the population of rural areas that Monica was addressing. Once we start accounting for our natural capital, the importance of our natural capital, then our rural areas will be much more valuable. More investments will be going there because it's where our natural capital is. More innovation will flow there, more management. We will protect biodiversity easier. So This is the key issue we need to address. How do we measure the vitality, the health of our economy? Once we address that, many other things will come into place.
Anyone else who want to give a last answer?
Maybe I could just add, I don't repeat what Mark said, I agree with everything. I was just wanting to say that also we have European projects where we have first the evidence of this very rapid change, and also ways of how to help to, the term is assisted migration, for example, that forests will survive in a new form. And that dynamic aspect, and that's something that was mentioned before also by Yannis, is also important to understand how the environment and also how biodiversity, conservation and protection issues are seen. Also here, I think this static approach will not be the approach for the future, because nature is developing much too fast and climate is changing our natural resources too fast. So also here we need an open mind and need an innovative approach on how we combine also that aspect and bring it into the future.
If I can say just one sentence, Jürgen.
Yes, please do so.
After this encouraging debate, stay optimists, because optimists live longer and better.
Well, the good news about that is that you will see the trees growing higher and probably faster. I think
Jürgen, I could also say that here, because I think I'm the only one working in a university teaching future foresters. I think this is key also for applying all what we have, what you have said, especially in relation to adaptation. So all this knowledge, advanced knowledge that this new generation of foresters will apply, needs to be dropped to university to start changing this mindset. So we'll be happy to collaborate in the future to make this happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Before thanking you, I would like to come to a very general conclusion of the webinar. First of all, we have heard very interesting talks. We had a very interesting debate. I come to the conclusion that, yeah, there is a real need to have European forests. And for that, there is a real need to have a good, innovative, well thought European forestry strategy, because that's something we need to combat climate change. It's something we need to combat biodiversity loss. But if we want to make a success out of it, we need that paradigm shift. We have to make sure that we start thinking in a more systemic way, making sure that our forests are still there in 100 years. And for the optimists under us, maybe we will still be alive at that moment. I would like to thank my panelists. I would like to thank you on the other side of the screen, our audience. I think we had a very interesting afternoon. I would say, don't forget, we still have another webinar tomorrow afternoon in the FFA Solutions Week, and especially next week on Tuesday, we have the main FFA event, so don't miss it. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
On behalf of all our partners and supporters in the Forum for the Future of Agriculture, we hope you've enjoyed today's event. For more information and details of other activities that has taken place during the FFA's month of March, please go to our website. See you again next time.